Some time ago, I released a survey asking what your opinions are on the Fallout TV show and received 386 responses. Not nearly as high as the last survey, though it's still a decent amount. And while not every answer was required, most submitted their general opinions, character-specific opinions, Fallout-specific opinions, and gave their thoughts on some controversial aspects. We'll go through the numbers, then look at a few responses on how you guys would have handled the series if you were given the opportunity. Let's begin. We start off with the general opinions about the show. Naturally, the first is the most obvious question. Did the responders watch the show? Overwhelmingly, at 81.3%, the responders claim to have watched and completed the show. The next largest, at a mere 9.4%, watched a few episodes and then dropped the show. 6.8% only experienced the show through secondhand sources, such as clips, reviews, etc. And no spoilers. 2.1% were still working on it as of the response. And finally, at 0.5%, or rather, 2 individuals, were completely blind to the show at the time of responding. Moving on, the survey takers were asked to rate the show 1 through 5, 1 being very bad to 5 being very good. Most felt the show was better than not, with 4 taking the lead at 42.4% and 5 taking 17.4% at the next highest. Overall, less than a quarter of the survey takers combined voted either 2 or 1. Next, I asked how they felt about the show's use of violence and gore. 57.1% felt that the show had the perfect amount. The next highest, at 21.5%, wanted a bit more, while 14.9% felt it was too much. 4.5% was never a fan of gore, while 2.1% wanted a lot more gore. Up next, I asked how they enjoyed the humor. Most, at 44.4%, felt that the jokes were fine, though some were pretty bad. In second place, at 23.8%, felt that the jokes were perfect, while 23.2% felt that most of the jokes were pretty bad, and 8.6% didn't find the show to their humor. Finally, I asked about the overall story. It was fairly divisive. 38% felt the storyline was mostly good, but with some hiccups. 20.1% felt that it had a serviceable storyline. 18.5% felt the storyline was awful and actively hurt the show, while 12.2% felt that the storyline was uninspired with nice set pieces. In the last place, at 11.2%, were the people who thoroughly enjoyed the storyline. I moved on to asking questions about the characters. I asked the responders who their favorite character was. Most said Cooper at 47.9%, with Lucy following fairly distantly at 18.8%. 13.6% said they liked them all equally, and Maximus got the least amount of favorites with 7.3%. 6.8% said they disliked them all equally, and a series of other answers were given, ranging from favoring 2 specific characters, the dog, to even joke characters. I don't remember putting the other option up, but all the same. Next, I asked who their least favorite was. The reverse happened, with Maximus taking the majority of the least favorite at 58.9%. The liked equally option took 18.3%, 9.7% went to Lucy, and Cooper took the least amount of least favorites with 6%. Again, there were other answers that I don't remember putting up, but you know, it was a copy and paste job on my part. I followed the main characters up by asking about major characters who had plot importance, including the main characters. I asked them to select if they felt a character was good, bad, annoying, endearing, a character who can grow on you, a character who can exhaust you, a character that would be better as a side character, or benefits as a major character. Now, side character can be fairly vague. I feel a side character doesn't really have much of an impact on the overall storyline and doesn't do much to move the plot along. They merely add flavor to the world, such as these guys. Major characters, on the other hand, do add to the plot in significant ways. This includes Lucy, Max, Cooper, Moldaver, Thaddeus, Hank, and Bud. In retrospect, I should have included Norm and Betty, but I didn't think about it at the time. I'm kicking myself for those exclusions. In addition, Will Zig could also count, maybe. He's definitely extremely plot relevant, but he died pretty early on, so I'm uncertain. Regardless, unfortunately, I didn't think about describing this distinction prior to releasing the survey, and I'm unsure if that had any bearing on the answers. Nevertheless, here are the results. Lucy is stated to be a good character that's endearing, but some find her a bit annoying. She is a character that can grow on you while benefiting as a major character. Maximus is much more divisive, being stated to be a good character more than not, but a significant amount don't feel as such. Most find him rather annoying, though some do view him as endearing. and an even amount see him as both exhausting and a character that can grow on you. Finally, most believe he'd be better off as a side character, but a significant do feel as though he benefits as a major character. Unsurprisingly, Cooper, being already claimed as the favorite, was much more praised. His results reflects Lucy's, but to a stronger degree, and with less ambiguity. Overwhelmingly, people feel he's a good character. Some feel he's endearing, but not too many. He's a character that does grow on you and benefits as a major character. Moldaver came up next. She was considered a bad character, with a significant portion also saying she's a good one. Almost a reverse of Maximus' situation. Many found her to be annoying, and a small amount found her to be endearing. Many say she can exhaust the viewer and would be better off as a side character. Thaddeus was a lot more loved than Maximus, being strongly voted as a good character, while many found him annoying. Some did find him rather endearing. Fittingly, many feel he grows on the viewer, but still would be better off as a side character. Next, Hank. Many feel Hank is a good character, but a sizable portion feel otherwise. A lot find him annoying and exhausting, while there's a split belief if he's better off as a major character or would benefit as a side character. Finally, Bud. Interestingly, Bud is considered a good character, with a sizable amount feeling he's bad, though there's little doubt many found him to be annoying and exhausting. Many feel he'd be better off as a side character. Thinking about it, I could have rephrased a few of these answers. Major character, side character. I could have included the option to increase importance or decrease importance, or maybe the option to remove the character altogether. Nevertheless, we finally leave the character questions and talk about Fallout elements. I asked the responders if they felt the show was faithful to the source material. Most felt it moderately was, but with some glaring issues, at 31.3%. 28.7% felt it was mostly faithful, with some hiccups. 18.8% felt it was barely faithful, and 12.3% felt it was extremely faithful. 7.6% said it wasn't faithful at all, and 1.3% didn't care how faithful it was. I asked about the West Coast setting next. This was an important one, because generally people who favor the games set on the West Coast tend to be a bit more critical of newer offerings. 34.6% liked the setting in theory, but not the execution, while 31.3% liked both the setting and execution. 9.9% didn't care, and 7% would have preferred it if the show was set on the East Coast. 7.8% would have preferred the Midwest. The others gave different locations, such as the South, Texas, or in my mother, and others still just kind of vented their frustrations with the execution of the setting. I asked their opinion on the lack of super mutants and death claws. The answers were both really similar, with most not caring, some favoring it, and a few disappointed. More were disappointed by the lack of death claws than the super mutants, however. That said, a majority were disappointed with the T-60 being the only representation of power armor, at 59.7%. 28.6% didn't care, while 11.7% favored it. Meanwhile, the Enclave still existing, albeit perhaps very limited, was fairly split. Most favored it at 41.4%, but 38% felt disappointed. 20.6% did not care. I asked them if they were surprised to learn that the Enclave still existed. 69% were not surprised, expecting them to return at some point. 26% were surprised, feeling like Fallout 3 was going to be their last major appearance, short of Remnants. 4.9% did not care. I then asked how they felt the show handled the Brotherhood. It was a pretty mixed bag. 27.6% liked most of it. 26.6% was mixed. 17.4% hated it. 14.8% disliked most of it, and 12.5% loved it. 1% did not care. The NCR's handling was a bit more agreed upon, and not for the better, with most at 43.5% hating it. 25.1% felt it was a pretty mixed bag. 18.1% disliked most of it, 7.6% liked most of it, 4.5% loved it, and 1.3% did not care. Last, on the Fallout-specific focus questions, I asked if they felt there were enough Fallout creatures. Most felt the amount was appropriate, given the screen time, at 39.1%. 33.3% felt there wasn't enough Fallout creatures. 21.8% felt the amount was fine, but the creatures selected were disappointing. 5.5% said it didn't care how many were chosen, and, perhaps unsurprisingly, nobody felt there were too many Fallout creatures. Now we move on to the controversial subjects. I started off with the most obvious question. How did they feel about the destruction of Shady Sands? The majority, at 51.7%, felt it was a bad choice and handled poorly. 26.1% felt it was a good idea, but handled poorly. 10.4% felt it was a good world building choice and supported it, while 8.9% felt it was a bad choice, but handled well. And finally, 2.9% did not care. One interesting aspect I wondered was if the people felt the destruction of Shady Sands can be viewed as disrespectful to classic players. So that's what I asked, and it had a split belief between two major camps. 42.6% felt it was disrespectful, while 48.1% felt it wasn't, but did understand how it can be viewed that way. 10.2% felt it was not, and didn't understand how it can be viewed that way, while 5.5% didn't care. Now here comes a tough question, and it's tough for me as someone who created this survey. I asked the survey taker if they felt that Shady Sands' location in the show was a violation of canon. And it's tough for me because I really wanted to avoid leading the responder. However, I felt like I needed to explain some things because I'm quite positive there's a lot of people who have seen the show and only have passing understanding of Fallout lore for the classic games. So I explained the arguments for and against and did my best to stay neutral. I have no idea if I was successful at avoiding leading, but I thought about this question a lot. Plus, one of my previous videos might encourage some bias. Anyway, at 45.7%, most felt it was a violation of canon. 26.9% said it likely did, but felt it was salvageable. 12.8% stated that Shady Sands' location has moved before, it didn't matter if it moved again. 11.7% didn't care about the controversy, and 2.9% felt it didn't matter. Finally, I moved on to the Vault-Tec Did It questions. How did the survey taker feel about it firstly? Most felt it was an awful decision that made no sense at 35.6%. 30.6% felt skeptical, but also stated it was ambiguous enough that they could abort it if needed. 16.1% felt it was interesting, but very weary of it. 14.5% felt it was a great choice and fitting for Vault-Tec. And 3.1% didn't care. I asked if they prefer the mystery, being confirmed, or something else. 59.5% favored the mystery, while 18.2% wanted it to be China. 10.9% feel it doesn't matter. And 6.5% loved the idea of Vault-Tec being the ones who did it, while some either preferred the US, Enclave, or aliens doing it. Honestly, this is one of the questions I felt could have used more clarity and maybe allowed for another option. Now I asked if the ghoul serum that keeps ghouls from going feral was a break in canon, as it seems to suggest that this stuff has been around for a long time. Most, at 38.5%, felt it was, as it likely would have been brought up before given how big of a deal it is for ghouls. 22.7% feels that there's not enough information to say. 20.3% says it depends if it's a placebo or not. And 15.1% said it was fine, as just being around doesn't mean that ghouls would believe it or even have access to it. 3.4% did not care. Finally, the last question, besides the permission to use written responses. Do they feel that Thaddeus turning into a ghoul with potent healing abilities contradicts canon? 32.4% felt it might, but depends on what happens to him in the coming weeks or months. 31.1% feel it does contradict, as we know what happens to ghouls, and it's not a healing factor. 19.1% feel it doesn't contradict, because it's merely Maximus saying, I think you're a ghoul. 14.4% feel there's not enough details to say. And finally, 3.1% did not care. I feel like I should have added another option to say it fits well with the current canon, because all the options suggest it's a violation, even the more positive one. Now we begin with some of the written ideas that were given. I presented this as a chance to write the Fallout show with the benefit of hindsight, as if the survey taker went back in time and was given full creative control over the show. How would they change it, if at all? There's a variety of answers from minor tweaks to major overhauls. One example of keeping most of the same script with some tweaks comes from FR, who feels that Moldaver was handled rather sloppily. She's shown to be a religious figure for some, which should suggest some sway and power, yet cares little for it. It's a side thing in the show. FR was then focused on that aspect, making her an actual head of the new religion that brings tech and hope, preying on the disarray of the NCR's collapse, along with bringing in early Shady Sands religious material. I assume FR means the followers of Dharma, a religious figure preached by Aradesh in Fallout 1. FR also notes that while they felt the NCR's collapse was actually a good idea, feeling rather in line with the tones of Fallout, they didn't like the execution. Specifically, the controversial choice to have Shady Sands be nuked by a jealous husband who attempted to kill his wife in the process. That would be changed by Hank having a more clear motive for nuking Shady Sands, which also involves Moldaver and Rose working with the NCR to expose the managers, resulting in a new power struggle between the secret group and the NCR. Then it moves from a jealous husband getting a bit uppity to a man trying to keep his organization safe from future threats. Another example of tweaks comes from Bugo, who would change the setting to be a bit more north, clarify the situation between the BOS chapters and how they were united, remove the ghoul serum as it doesn't fit nicely with established lore, and edit the Vault-Tec stuff to be a bit more about extending the resource war rather than dropping nukes. Others would go a bit further away from it. For instance, Mr. Destruction would have this show set in Oklahoma and focus on a tribal protagonist. The main character is scouting west after their home is hit by an unknown illness. They discover a civilization born from a vault that used their gag. The protagonist, after getting into diplomatic talks with the Vault Nation, learns of a power armor-wearing group on the outskirts of Oklahoma City. The protagonist searches for them, accompanied by a Vault Nation companion. Eventually, the main character is abducted by raiders while the companion flees, and after a dark event at night, the companion returns to free the protagonist, but is shot in the process. After they both escape, the companion is on borrowed time. Eventually, they're both taken into custody by the Brotherhood of Steel. After discussion, the BOS offers the protagonist some men and a medically trained scribe to save the companion. Upon returning to the protagonist's homeland, they find it in shambles. They learn that a rival tribe has come in and taken their people to obtain slave labor. They ultimately save their people with the aid of the BOS. The protagonist joins their rank while their people stay in the village, and the companion returns home. Such is a drastically different story than the current show. Another example of a wildly different plotline comes from SpongeBob 89976, and I'm presenting it because it made me chuckle a little bit when I read it. SpongeBob SquarePants wakes up and notices Gary is gone. Naturally, he does the only sensible thing and travels to New Vegas, and finds out that Mr. House took his beloved Snail, so the autocrat will only return Gary if SpongeBob can find him a copy of Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. But such only comes to pass in Season 2. Quite a different tale, and honestly, now I'm curious how this will play out. Kinda wanna see Mr. Krabs running the Krusty Cons. Anyway, that was your opinions on the Fallout TV show. There were some hurdles, the usual typos. I felt one question led a bit too much, but you already know that. Plus, I forgot to include some details or answers, and I didn't really get the amount of responses that I wanted to. Still, assuming this is reflective of reality, it seems to be a fairly popular show with some problems, and people absolutely hate a few choices that were made. But even with the issues, it's more liked than not. I'm sure I'll read off some more in the future. Give some time for some of the longer answers. And a special thanks to my channel members, especially my members, Thrice Over members, like That Crazy Game Developer and Danny McPhee. If you'd like to support me and join as well, I'd be more than happy. Otherwise, like, share, subscribe, all that typical YouTube stuff. Thank you. Have a good one.